You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're looking at Broadway bombs. And now, here's Arthur.
Hello, everybody. We are always talking about Tales from Hollywoodland, but an extension of Hollywoodland, of course, is Broadway. It's just we make an east turn today, turn eastward, and we're going to talk about Broadway. So we've certainly spoken a lot about Hollywood bombs, and there are many of them. And today we're going to talk about some of the big bombs on Broadway. We hear so much about the big hits, and there are many big hits, and so many of the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, and Lerner and Loewe, and Frank Lesser. There's so many great shows from Broadway. But Broadway also has bombs, things that happen that it's hard to believe. And one of our partners here, of course, is Julian Schlossberg, and he is a Broadway producer. So we're going to turn to you a lot here, Julian. We're going to utilize your expertise. And the first thing I would like to know is, Julian, you've been on Broadway for most of your adult life. What makes a Broadway bomb?
Oh boy, if anyone knew that, Arthur, they wouldn't do it. The answer really is you go in, nobody, with the exception of Mel Brooks writing the producers, nobody goes in to say, let's see if we can really bomb. Let's see if we can have a flop. You know, things have been going so well, it's time to just fall on our ass. It just doesn't work that way. What happens, though, is very strange. Many shows, especially musicals, start out of town. And when you start out of town, you hope you're going to get a good feeling of what's going on. Now, Larry Gelbart may have been one of the funniest men I've ever worked with or knew, and he has the best line about a musical out of town. He said, if Hitler's alive, I hope he's doing a musical out of town. and that really does say a lot for what happens. But let's start with the idea that nobody starts to make a bad musical. But let's start out with what's considered, I'm afraid, the biggest loss and a big bomb was the Spider-Man show, which was relatively recent in the last few years. Tony Adams, who was working with Blake Edwards, had produced Victor Victoria, which was a moderate success, but it wasn't huge, but it was made into a movie, and that was successful. And he got the rights to do Spider-Man, which was really tough because Marvel Comics owned it. And he gets to meet Bono and The Edge. They want to do the music. And they suggest Julie Taymor. Julie Taymor, my God, she's come off Lion King. You can't get better. And she's going to co-write it. She's going to design it. And she's going to direct it. Everything is great on paper. And that's one of the scariest parts of producing on Broadway, or even in movies, but certainly on Broadway, because you line up this incredible talent, and then what happens? Sometimes the cake rises, sometimes it flattens. And in Spider-Man, they had terrific amount of technical brilliance in that show, but they also had a lot of injuries. They had a lot of fighting going on. They eventually fired Julie Taymor. It took years to put it on. They claim a $75 million loss. And as I said to Arthur the other day, I'd like to have the difference between 75 million and what they really lost, which I guarantee you was many more millions. Now, I don't know what happened. I didn't see the show, so I can't answer. But I do know that nobody starts to make a bad show. That's not your goal, except...
Julian, in the movies, it's generally an accepted fact that 8 out of 10 movies lose money. What about in Broadway, in theaters? Are the odds as bad as that in Broadway, or is
yes, it was. it's different now. Everything is kind of changed in our society, and it's kind of different now. But I would say that still most shows lose money. It's not. It's almost. I used to say it's equivalent to going for oil. You know, going for oil. You'd come up empty, but when you hit, I can assure you, on a big musical, it makes more money than almost any movie. Because a movie comes and goes, a musical can sit in a city for years and years and years. So it's, believe it or not, you can make more money on a hit musical than on most hit movies.
There's no question. And what happens, as I understand it, is you now have these cities all over America and the world that run these hit shows off of Broadway, not only the West End and London, but I'm talking about all over. I got to know Garth Drabinsky, and Garth kind of gave me a whole history of how this stuff works. But today, because of what's happened with ticket prices, they're getting hundreds of dollars a ticket in Sheboygan, Illinois for these shows. So the hits are more powerful than ever before. The failures, it's like an old story, but there are still bombs in movies. I would dispute, Steve, that 8 out of 10. I would say it's probably more like, maybe a little less than 50%, because there's too many avenues where there's money that can come in to the film. On Broadway, though, what Julian, you're describing sounds to me like quicksand. You get into one of these shows and you just keep going and going, and you're trying to find it. And it gets deeper and deeper, and you come up with Spider-Man or other things like Breakfast at Tiffany's. I mean, it's perfect looking things going in. They're perfect. And then, do you have any personal experiences with these, Jules?
Well, I mean, Bullets Over Broadway was the last big musical that I produced, and we had what we felt everything going for us. We had a movie that was a success that people liked. We had a great title for Broadway, Bullets Over Broadway. We had Susan Stroman as the choreographer and the director, and we had Woody Allen have written the book. We had an incredible Broadway cast, and we also brought in a big television name, Zach Braff, as the lead. So again, everything was what you wanted on paper. Now, I can say in everything I've ever produced, and I've produced between 60 and 70 shows and movies and whatever, I would say that this was the one that I thought I finally had hit the gold ring. I saw what happened in previews. People stood and screamed and yelled, and it was sensational. And I, as I've said privately, I'll say it this time, probably the best producer in the business is a fellow named Scott Rudin. And I've known him since he was a kid. And he called to say, I'd like to have a part of your show because you're going to have the biggest show on Broadway this season. Well, coming from him, I was excited. And I was in a strange position. I had no room. I had all the money. So it's a crazy time. I don't know that my experience was that I to this day don't know what happened.
Please tell us something, though. Here's something that I'd love to know. I think our audience would love to know. So you've gone through previews with this, what sounded like a hit show on paper for sure. And now you go through the previews and you get the feedback, and the feedback is very positive. It's now the morning of the opening of the show on Broadway, and you get up in the morning. Where's your head? What are you thinking?
I'm in the clouds. I'm so excited. I'm thinking this is it. I've worked all these years in show business. Maybe I've done it 40, 50 years. I finally got the gold ring. I know I don't even think it's going to be a problem. I have a big advance. Millions have come in. It looks fantastic. And I remember thinking, if we needed some money, I'd do it. I'd put money in. And of course, you don't want to do that as a producer. That's not in the producer handbook. You don't want to put your own money in. But I would have. I was sure of this, of anything I've ever done.
You had no spilkies? Nothing at all that day?
Oh, you have that because you don't know, of course. But I was feeling as confident as I ever had on anything I've ever done. And I love the show. You know, I've produced shows where I'm sitting there thinking, what happened? Why can't I make this happen? Why can't it work? I wish the second act was better, or I wish this particular actor, we had fired him when I said we should fire him. The director fought me, whatever, all kinds of things. I had that show that was on Broadway at the St. James Theater was the show I wanted. And it's just, I'll tell you guys, I'll tell you a quick story, which I think you'll like. At the end of every first act during the previews, Woody, the writer, and Susan Stroman, the director, and I would meet in the manager's office after the first act. And I had my mother come to a preview. And she was at that point about 95, 96 years old. But she was a big theater goer, and she just loved it. So I ran into have the meeting to go over what we thought of the first act. And Susan Stroman says, "What does your mother think?" I said, "My mother loves it." And Woody looked up and said, "Well, at least we got the 90-year-olds.
Oh, God. So, Julian, what happened with the show? What with all this great buzz, what happened?
Well, what happened was the New York Times did not like it. The other reviews were really pretty terrific. But to this day, Steve, Arthur has asked me this more than once over our lifetime of friendship. What happened? And I still don't know. I mean, I can tell certain things happened that wouldn't be helpful, including the New York Times. But we've been very fortunate that we've done very well around the world. We did particularly well in Japan. It was a very big hit in Japan. And we play around the world, but I never got the money back for the investors. But I would say they got about 25% of their money back. The only business in the world that I've ever been involved with, a guy gives you $1,000, you give him back $250, and he can't stop thanking you.
Sounds like a Stephen Sondheim investor
Yeah.
from years ago. Anyway,
It's true.
So, but let's go back to that day. So now the day goes by, and you're flying. You're in the clouds.
Yes.
When is the first time you had a feeling of, whoops, something's going on here? When did that occur?
The first thing that happened was probably the greatest opening night party that I'll ever be involved with was held for Bullets Over Broadway. It was held at the Modern Museum, not the Museum of Metropolitan Museum. It's unbelievable, this party with the bands and the music. The party, we did not pay for the party. One of the investors was so wealthy that he said, "I don't care what the party cost. I will pay for the party. Nothing to do with the play." The party cost, ready, guys? $750,000.
Holy
You're
moly!
kidding. You're kidding.
Yeah.
What the hell were the hors d'oeuvres?
The hors d'oeuvres. Lobster was the smallest thing.
Oh, God.
The lobsters had $100 bills on their tail.
Yeah, but so you got to remember, Arthur, I'm flying morning, noon, and night, and the publicist walks over to me and says, "You have a moment?" I said, "Sure." Steve will understand this, Steve Rubin. He says, "Come on." He said, "Not good." I said, "Really?"
Oh, boy.
Let me see. And they had gotten an early edition of the Times for the next day. You could get it in those days around 10 o'clock at night.
What year was this, Julian?
I've been trying to forget, Arthur.
I'm sorry. Well,
I just don't know.
wasn't that long ago?
It wasn't that long. It was probably within maybe 10 years. I don't know. There's a Bruce Springsteen lyric. I worked with him. And the lyric is, "The memories come back to haunt me. They haunt me like a curse."
So,
Did Woody come to the party?
Oh, yes, he did. Woody came to the party. Woody was great. He was a great collaborator. He worked with Susan well. The idea that he doesn't give notes, maybe he doesn't for some of his movies. He sure did in the show with Susan. He was terrific to work with. And it wasn't the first time. I did three or four. I've done 3 or 4 with him. And I loved working with him, and I still do.
what is the feeling like when that publicist comes over and gives you the first?
Well, I don't tell anyone. I want people to enjoy the party. So I told nobody except.
But how did you feel? Well, what is that feeling?
I think it's depression plus.
In other words, you're sitting on top of the world, and all of a sudden a publicist comes over and says, "Wait a minute." It changes the whole.
I was so unhappy I can't tell you. And
so what did they hone in on in that horrible review? What could they have possibly said to destroy that whole?
Oh, it's another jukebox musical because it wasn't original music. It was some of the greatest music ever written of the 30s. It was perfect we felt for the show,
right.
But they honed in on that. I mean, I don't know, Steve. You try not to remember that kind of stuff. At least,
no, of course. Listen, when I was a national publicity director for a company that Norman Levy was running called New Century Vista, we had a screening of a movie that I thought was just terrific, and we got the reviews, and they were horrible. And I swear I must have seen a different movie.
What was the movie?
It was called Made to Order. It was an Ali Sheedy post-Brat Pack movie. Adorable movie about a rich girl who ends up losing everything and she becomes a maid and she discovers humanity.
MAID, Maid.
Yes, thank you. MAID. Yeah. And Dick Shawn was in it. He was hysterical. But I've never seen such horrible reviews. I sometimes wonder, critics have a responsibility. Obviously, they have to tell the public what they think. But sometimes I think they just they live in a different world.
You know what John Wilkes Booth's last words were? I'm sorry, I thought he was a critic. I'm sorry, I thought he was a critic. Let's get back to this list. I'm looking here at a list of the 100 biggest bombs on Broadway for history. And to this point of looking at this list, I don't see your show on there, Julian, so you escape being one of the top 100. But there's all these shows because of your history on Broadway. You're familiar with them. What happened with Breakfast at Tiffany's? It says here that it was a sure thing.
Well, that's a wonderful story because you've got David Merrick, who by far was the most important producer on Broadway. He probably did in his lifetime 75, 80 shows. He goes out and hires the two of the biggest names on television, Mary Tyler Moore and Richard Chamberlain, both from TV and huge successes. They do the play Out of Town in Washington. It's a gigantic commercial success, but Merrick knows it's in trouble. And he's got Abe Burrows, one of the great directors of all time, who also was involved with everything from Guys and Dolls. He was incredible. And he has him, and he fires him and brings in Joseph Anthony, who's really not done any musicals, or if he had, they were very unknown. And he doesn't like the book, and he brings in Edward Albee, who never wrote a musical. And they come to New York City, and he does something that I've never seen done before or since. After 4 previews with a $2 million advance. Now, guys, $2 million is probably equivalent to, I don't know how much today, maybe 15, 20 million. It is a gigantic advance. 4 previews, closes the show, and says, I don't want the critics to attack my show.
Did you see it?
I did not. I wasn't around for the 4. I might have come for the 7.
Now, this evolves from the movie, correct?
Yes, this is based on Truman Capote.
On the short story, yes.
Yeah. It was originally called Breakfast at Tiffany's. They changed the title to Holly Golightly with a hope that something would happen.
Did they use Moon River?
I don't know.
They don't know if they used the song?
I don't know if Johnny Mercer would give them the permission to do so.
By the way, just to throw a movie thought there, the original movie is obviously a classic, except when Mickey Rooney is on camera. What were they thinking?
Big mistake.
And even then, there wasn't woke, and it should have been woke for that. Holy cow.
Big mistake.
Well, we should say quickly, those who didn't see it, he's lampooning a Japanese or Chinese, an Asian person. And it's just the most embarrassing thing you want to see.
I always love the story that Henry Mancini tells, who wrote the music to Moon River and the score for the movie, that they went up to Pasadena to I believe it was Santa Barbara, to sneak preview the picture. And after the screening, the the studio execs came over to Mancini and said, one thing we know from this screening is they like the movie, but that song Moon River's got to go. They don't understand it. Huckleberry Love, they don't get it. And then Johnny Mercer said, if that song goes, you will never see me at the studio ever again. And so, of course, you see, you got all that stuff.
Well,
there's a lot of these shows that are on this list, Julian, and some of them are incredible.
By the way, Arthur, that same story happened in The Wizard of Oz, where the studio executives wanted to remove Over the Rainbow from the movie. They said it slows the whole movie down. Get rid of it.
Well, yeah, look, hey, I was at a sneak preview of Jaws, 1975, Full House, Framingham, Massachusetts, and I heard a couple of people say this thing is too violent to do business. It was too violent. It was too scary. Unbelievable. Speaking of scary, there was a horror movie, a very successful film from Stephen King that was called Carrie, Carrie. It's listed as the second biggest bomb in the history of Broadway. Do we know why? Julian, back to you.
Well, again, Hoff, I can't tell why on any of these things because unless I've seen them, maybe I could have an opinion. But Carrie, I think they changed. I think Betty Buckley came into that show because she had been in the movie. But I will say that when you were talking about Moon River in that movie, it was great to hear that Audrey Hepburn did sing her own song. Marnie Nixon or no one else was going to dub her.
Julian Mancini's favorite version of that song was Audrey Hepburn with a guitar.
It's so wonderful. It's so moving. And because she can, we both know the great singers are the great actors. The best singers are the ones who know how to act. And while she may not be a great singer, she sure knew how to act.
You felt it, yeah.
Yeah. But what's interesting about that, Arthur, Johnny Mercer made this up. Nobody ever said Huckleberry Friend.
That's right.
I saw him talk about it, and he said I needed 4 syllables. Huckleberry. I couldn't come up with
Huckleberry Friend. Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I remember Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry. I'll call it my Huckleberry Friend, and it has become a little part of the English language now. So.
What makes King Kong a huge movie? The number 3 biggest bomb on Broadway, King Kong.
I did see King Kong, and King Kong was probably the most spectacular technical play I've ever seen. 8 to 10 people operated this ape, and the ape moved and came after. I mean, it was great special effects. The people who later did the special effects for Moulin Rouge had done King Kong, but they had never done Broadway before. So already they were starting to, who the hell are they? If they had done Moulin Rouge first and then King Kong second, it might have been a different story. I can tell you that when the ship is going to Skull Island, you're on that boat. You think you're on that boat. It was unbelievable. It was so spectacular to see that. It deserved so much more. And as a producer, and you guys know because you all produce, you have a title called King Kong. You can't get a better title. That's not a title for America or North America. That's a worldwide title. What a beginning. And since 70% of Broadway is tourists, is not New Yorkers, 70%, everybody is a potential buyer. So King Kong on paper looked fantastic. And it had opened in Australia, in Melbourne, and had been a big success. So you just don't know. You don't know. And I know, Arthur, you'll ask me what happened. I have to say I don't know.
Yeah, well, we understand. From the film business, we have seen these things happen as well, certainly.
Yes.
There are no sure things. Sometimes there are big surprises when you see something that you think stinks and becomes a big hit. You've got that. I've always said that for me, and my wife, and many others we've spoken to, one of the worst shows I've ever seen was one of the biggest hits in the history of Broadway. That's called Cats, C-A-T-S. Take away the song Memories, and I just kept looking at the ceiling. So
yeah, it's interesting because I had an opposite reaction. I am, as you know, I'm a West Coast person. I'm not a Broadway person, but I came to New York. I saw Cats. I got fourth row seats. So whenever those animals all came down all the cats came running down the aisles, they were right next to me, and I was enthralled, and I loved all the songs.
You were in the majority, Steve. You were in the majority.
I guess I was, and I went out and bought the album as soon as I got home. So obviously that was a good sign.
As Arthur said, Steve, I mean, it was a giant success. I was looking for the exit sign.
Well, you guys are much more sophisticated goers than me. Now, for me, seating is very key for me to have an enjoyable time. In LA, I went to see Grease, which was being revived for the 9,000th time. I sat in the very last row of the Kodak, and I hated everything,
including your seats.
Nothing worked for me, but it was a tepid production of Grease. I mean, Grease is all about energy, and those songs are so vibrant. And that's another thing about musicals. As it is with film musicals, I am always looking for the song I want to sing as I'm leaving. The bouncy go-to song. And some of these musicals, I just didn't like the songs at all. I mean, look at Wicked. Wicked, of course, is a huge success. It's probably one of the most successful musicals in history. Spawned a huge movie. When I saw it in previews in San Francisco, I didn't like any of the songs.
There was a lot of changes from San Francisco to New York because a good friend of mine produced it. So what you saw may have been second rate, but it turned out, as we know, to be this giant hit.
But that was a show that was all about young women and moms taking their daughters. That was a big key to the success of that show. And my own daughter was about 8 or 10 at that time. And she started playing the songs in her room, and all I'm hearing is that soundtrack. So by the way, that audience, that mothers taking their daughters to musicals, doesn't get satiated very often. So that was a big win for them.
I'll give you a movie that was a musical that did no business, and one of the best movies I loved it. And I love the music. Leslie Bricusse again, called Goodbye, Mr. Chips, with Petula Clark and Peter O'Toole. I defy anyone to tell me they don't love that movie. That is just one of the great, wonderful movies. It makes you feel good and everything, and it just nobody came. Again, those are questions people have asked me through. How does that happen? Well, like Julian, who the hell knows? Sometimes it happens.
How were the reviews, Arthur? Do you remember?
If Julian, I don't. But if they were bad, then the people were last week's food columnists. They wouldn't know what they're talking about. Have you guys seen Goodbye, Mr. Chips, the film? I urge you to see it. It's as great today as
I saw the original Goodbye, Mr. Chips, but
the original, no, this was just an outstanding movie that didn't work. But you get the thing. We go back to things like Day of the Jackal, great book, great movie, super great movie, and it didn't really do business. So there's always the unknown that's sitting out there. We had a movie when I was at United Artists called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And I remember it never did as much as anybody thought it would, although I think it turned profit eventually. But I remember people saying, this would make a great Broadway show. That's what this really, with the song of the car and it's number 8 on the list of biggest bombs.
Well, one of the reasons was that the car was the lead. That's
no emotion,
Yeah, and literally, like the chandelier and Phantom, the car went over the audience.
Oh, there you go.
And came back. Go. Yeah.
Now I see on the list of great bombs the Rocky Horror Show. Now that I find surprising, because if ever there was a show that would capture the zeitgeist, I mean, all those midnight screenings all over the country. Does anybody know why it bombed?
Steve, are you sure it was a Rocky Horror or just Rocky something?
No, it was the Rocky Horror Show. I
saw it. Wow.
Actually, I saw it. You're never going to believe who one of the people in it was. Dick Cavett.
Dick Cavett in a musical.
Well, he didn't sing. He didn't sing. But it's very hard. I mean, William Goldman, a great writer of Butch Cassidy and All the President's Men, and he was not one of the nicest guys I ever knew. He wrote a book, and it said, "Nobody Knows." Nobody knows. And that is the truth. You don't. Let's take The Goodbye Girl. Here's an example. Goodbye Girl, giant movie, huge success. Neil decides, I'm from the theater, I want to put it on Broadway. He gets Bernadette Peters and he gets Martin Short. That's pretty damn good. He gets Gene Saks, who's directed not Odd Couple, the movie, not the play. Mike Nichols did the play. Anyhow, he gets Gene Saks to do it and Marvin Hamlish to do the music. Not bad, huh? Goodbye Girl, Bernadette Peters, Martin Short. I mean, Gene Saks and Marvin Hamlish. Down it goes.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a tough thing. It's called the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Broadway, and it's true. You do everything you can as a producer to put together the top people for a top production, and you can fizzle as they do, and it's just very sad.
One of my interactions with the great Harry Cohn, the legendary Harry Cohn, as a 17-year-old page at Columbia Pictures, I saw a movie in the screening room, which is part of my job, serving coffee, ginger ale, tea, anybody, and I saw a movie called Full of Life, which starred Judy Holliday, Richard Conte, and an opera singer named Salvatore Baccaloni. This movie was nothing, black and white. And what do I know? I'm standing in the back watching it and saying, why would they make this movie? It's got nothing. It's whether a house is made of wood, stucco, or brick. I couldn't believe it. Well, anyway, I had to take Harry Cohn with his baggage down to the limousine on Fifth Avenue. And I'm carrying his luggage, and I'm in the elevator, and I said, Mr. Cohn, I'm wondering about this movie Full of Life. Did you see it? Well, yes, I did. Well, what do you think? With a T-I-N-K. I said, I didn't think it was very much. And in perfect Harry Cohnese, he said, what the fuck do you know? Well, there it was. Now, as it turned out, nobody went to see Full of Life. But Harry Cohn, who I think Julian mentioned earlier, he used to tell if a picture was a hit or a miss by if he squirmed in his seat, his tushy starts squirming. We all have our ways of trying to figure it all out. No, it's an imperfect game. I don't care if it's a film. I don't care if it's a Broadway show or a play or God knows whatever else. There's just no perfect way to tell. When I look through this list of Broadway bombs, 100 shows, I'm shocked by some of them that absolutely died.
Well, you take a show like Mr. President. Mr. President is Irving Berlin, who in many ways is the greatest, because not only was he a great composer, he was a great lyricist. Can you imagine doing both brilliantly? And he did. He hadn't done a musical since Call Me Madam. He comes in to do Mr. President. It's going to star as the president, Robert Ryan, and as the first lady, Nanette Fabre. You get Joshua Logan, who's directed South Pacific, and you get Mr. President, and nobody can understand it. You don't know. What you do know is that it's the biggest crapshoot around. But again, if you hit, there's nothing like it.
Julian, did you ever see the musical based on the movie Big?
No, I didn't actually. But I think, yes, Susan Stroman choreographed it.
Right.
And Michael Onkren, I think, directed it. And yes, it was not a success, I'm afraid.
A success.
Yeah. No, one of the shows I did see and loved, and Arthur's a big fan of Jerry Herman, was Mac and Mabel.
Oh, great.
Mac and Mabel, Robert Preston, and again, Bernadette Peters. And one of the best songs of all time, I Won't Send You Flowers. And it was about Mac Sennett and his love affair with, Mabel Normand, a silent film star. Now, Mac Sennett was the man who did the Keystone Cops, and he had brought over Charlie Chaplin. I mean, he was quite a guy. And but it was a sad ending. And that's tough in a musical, especially in those days. Not so much now, but more then. And I'll never know what happened with that one. And I think, Arthur, didn't you tell me That was Jerry Herman's favorite score.
Yes, Mac and
And
Mabel.
And he
More
had done
favorite-
Hello
more
Dolly.
favorite
We
than-
should just say quickly he had done Hello Dolly and Mame.
Yes,
Amazing
and
he
La
would
Cage
say
aux
that.
Folles. And La Cage aux Folles. I Won't Send Roses is one of the all-time great love songs in the history of Broadway. Now, here's a show that maybe the title helped it be the number 18 biggest bomb. The title of the show is Rockabye Hamlet. Rockabye Hamlet. Think of that show. What a title to go with. Wow.
What about when they brought Rocky to Broadway 10 years ago? Rocky the musical. You know, I don't know how quite to examine this one. I did not see it. Julian, you're our Broadway guy.
I did see it, and it really was quite. You'll forgive the pun, but it did pack a punch.
Oh,
It
so
did.
it was a musical. They actually had songs.
Yeah, but it was the most thing was the fact that how good those they really did it well. It was I think, Arthur, it may have been Alex Timbers, the director,
Yeah.
who now has a big hit with the Bobby Darin show. I'm not sure. Does it say, Steve, it was Alex?
Possible.
I'm looking at it right now.
Speaking of the boxing scenes, a Golden Boy was great with boxing scenes with Sammy Davis.
Yeah, yes. And Arthur Penn directed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now there are there's a show here. The 20th biggest bomb in the history of Broadway is called The Ziegfeld Follies of 1957. That's 57, starring Beatrice Lillie and Billy DeWolf. So in 1957, I would think that maybe a revival of Ziegfeld Follies would have made sense, but it didn't, and it was expensive.
Well, they didn't have the money, Arthur.
You know,
I mean, the one thing that Flo Ziegfeld did, he had the biggest productions on Broadway. He wasn't alive then. Probably Billy Burke gave them, his wife probably gave them permission to do it, but it was a real cut down version of the Ziegfeld Follies. So I'm sorry to hear that it was not a success.
Number 21 was from a wonderful movie called Dr. Zhivago in 2015, complete bomb. You know, you go figure these things out to make great movies.
And it was a terrific production value. I did see that. In those days, I was a Tony voter, so I had to see every show, and sometimes it was painful. But Zhivago was a very big production. Once again, a big hit out of town in Australia. It had done very well in Melbourne and Sydney, and they were very excited about bringing it in. After all, Boris Pasternak bestseller, a David Lean incredible movie, and the beautiful production value, but you didn't care. You just didn't, what Arthur said earlier, you just walked in and you walked out saying, I don't care. I didn't care about Lara.
We had seen when we lived in Boston in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a lot of those shows came in, Broadway shows came into Boston for workout. I saw a show called Hells a Poppin' with Jerry Lewis, a sure thing. Jerry Lewis and Hells a Poppin' running through the audience. It closed in one night in Boston.
And they had announced it in New York. It was coming to New York.
Never got there.
Never got there.
No.
It's as we say, a tough racket. There was a years and years ago, there were two very famous producers, Joseph E. Levine and David Susskind, and they teamed up to make a musical called Kelly. And Kelly was I think one of the first plays that closed opening night.
Oh my God. Did it have to do with Gene Kelly?
No, it had to do with a man who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge. Not exactly what you say, well, I want to see that. But anyhow, it closed, and it had a lot of good people involved with it. But
look at this one. Look at this one. Number 26 biggest bomb. The Goodbye Girl, a great movie, hugely successful movie with Marty Short and Bernadette Peters. How could it miss?
Yeah, we just talked about that, absolutely. But the one that follows, 27, with Mel Brooks, Young Frankenstein, how could that not be a smash?
And the same people who gave you the producers.
Right. So you must have gone to see Young Frankenstein, Julian,
Yes, I did.
and you don't sound very enthusiastic.
Well, I have a very interesting theory that if Mel does not have Gene Wilder, he's not at his best.
No.
If you think of his best movies, in my opinion, they're Producers, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, all Gene Wilder. So that's my theory. It may not be right, and it doesn't take away from Mel's incredible career, but his best work is with Gene Wilder, I think.
Especially, Steve, you think about Young Frankenstein on stage, you'd like to think that Putting on the Ritz must have been some incredible song for the number for the show, but not to be. Now, I was friendly in those years with a guy named Garth Drabinsky, who was a very successful producer out of Toronto. Garth also owned a lot of movie theaters, and he had a show, and we had a special invitation in LA to come to the opening of something called Rags, RAGS. And all I remember about Rags, what can I say? There was a big party after the show, and we're standing there with Nathan Lane, and Nathan grabs my fingers and says, I don't know him, he didn't know me. He says, all I can say about this show is, oi, with an O-Y, Rags, go figure. It's supposed to be a big show, right?
Yeah, well, it's, again, nobody starts out to say, I'm going to make a turkey.
I don't know if it ever made it to Broadway, but the producer Meshulam Riklis, who was married to Pia Zadora, produced a production of The Diary of Anne Frank and cast Pia as Anne. The word on the street was that she was so terrible that when the Germans are kind of sneaking around trying to break in, or they're trying to find the place, somebody in the back row yelled out, "She's in the attic!"
Right, Steve. That's a great story. I always heard that the 10th row is full of critics, and they all stood up and said, "She's in the attic." Pia Zadora, who was his wife, and he would do anything for her.
And did.
Rickless. Wow, what a story that is. Oh, God. The flip side of this is, I want to just say this too, that I've seen a lot of Broadway shows. I love Broadway ever since I'm a kid. And for whatever it's worth, we're talking about bombs, but to me, the greatest single moment I've ever had in Broadway theater was Chorus Line. I've seen that show about 16 times in different venues all over the place. But the Broadway thing literally blew me away, and my wife. What a show that was. My God.
I remember the first time I saw that show, and I remember at the end, someone was screaming, "Bravo, bravo," and I realized it was me. Because anybody who does that, I really want to say, get out of the theater. Yeah. But I was so carried away with that show, and at that time I had a radio show, so I invited Kelly Bishop and Patricia Lopez, who sang this. I Feel Nothing, for the guy Morales who died. Anyhow, it was great to have them on the show and talk about Chorus Line.
From the first note of that show, dun, 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 bang, 1, 2, 3, 4. This show just was as great as it could ever get. It was, Willie Mays and Tiger Woods, and it was everything. It never stopped.
It just was sensitional.
Was there a musical, and I'm forgetting if there was one. Was there a musical about the Titanic?
Well, if it was, it sunk.
Good setup, Steve. Good setup.
Thank you, Steve.
You fed him and he took
it. There was a musical. Yes, there was. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there was, and it was a lot of good people involved. There was, and here's another interesting thing, at least for me. You get Leonard Bernstein was so busy doing all the young people's concerts and stuff that he hadn't done a musical since West Side Story. But he had done West Side Story, On the Town, Wonderful Town. He was a great Broadway composer who left it for classical music and doing great orchestra work and working with the Philharmonic. And he gets a visit from his Harvard classmate, Alan J. Lerner, who says, "I want to do a play about the White House in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue." and they come together to do this incredible musical. Can you imagine Alan J. Lerner and Leonard Bernstein? Unbelievable. You can't get better. Coca-Cola says, we'll pay the whole thing, whatever it is. So Coca-Cola finances it. And once again, you have a play that just didn't make it.
Number 12 on the list, Julian. Biggest bombs.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, I'm glad I'm hitting the list. So yeah. So it's such a tough.
Did you guys? Do we all agree that we like the movie The Bandwagon, which is about an opening?
Great!
One
of Vincent Minnelli's greatest musicals.
Jack Buchanan.
Yeah,
I always say that Jack Buchanan and Cyril Richard were the same person. different names. I go back to Mae West and Sheldon Leonard were the same person. If you listen to their voice, why don't you come up and see me sometime?
Very good.
Yes. Yeah.
So we talked about David Merrick, and as I said, from 65 on, he did about 80 plays and some gigantic ones, Hello, Dolly, etc. But he somehow got involved, wanted to do a musical called Mata Hari, about the spy. And it's a very interesting thing. He brings in Vincent Minnelli, because what made me think of it was Arthur and the Bandwagon. And Vincent Minnelli is going to do his first musical in years. And he casts a woman named Marissa Mell, a very attractive woman, but not a woman who was known at all. And she's the lead in it. And this musical, which was heralded for Broadway, opened and closed in Washington, D.C. There you go.
Hard to tell.
Julian, when you start the process of reaching out to investors, do you ask the composer to give you some sample songs? Do they do a lot of gratis work first?
I never have, but it's done all the time. I just never did that, Steve. But often the composer and lyricist will held sessions in penthouses and rehearsal rooms.
Right.
And they'll play the score. Now, when I was ostensibly involved in production at Paramount as a vice president, Charlie Strauss and Marty Charnin came up, and they needed 1/3 of the money to put on Annie. Mike Nichols had sent them up because I knew Mike, and I heard the score. And with the exception of Tomorrow, I wasn't that impressed. But 1/3 ownership for Annie in those days was $300,000, which I don't even have to tell you for a studio is beyond peanuts. It's nothing. And while I couldn't convince the heads to let me put that peanut money in, I said, look, forget about everything except we can be in the Mike Nichols business. Mike Nichols is the number 1 or 2 or 3 director right now, and we should be with him. Let's just back it. But I couldn't get him to do it. But the point is, Steve, that they both came up. The man who wrote the music, the guy who wrote the lyrics, and did the presentation for me.
And now Paramount passed on that presentation. Unbelievable.
And now I know that when you were an executive at Paramount, one of the movies that was in production at the time was Saturday Night Fever.
Yes.
Which you were there on the set. You told us all about it, which in 1999 becomes a musical. Did you see that one?
No, I kind of like to reserve my good memories of fine work rather than to take a chance. So no, I didn't. I was ostensibly in charge of the movie. I had nothing to do with its success. My entire contribution was to go to John Badham, the director, and say, when Travolta uses 4-letter words, we want to put this on television. Can we do another take without that? And they said, sure. And that was my entire contribution to Saturday Night Fever.
Well, I like the fact that the guy who put together this list of 100 of the worst bombs on Broadway says, and speaking about disco and sucking, when a Broadway show's poster actually advertises that it's live on stage, we've reached a new low.
I'll give you a quickie, guys. So I'm a teenager and I'm in show business, and there's an open casting call for the show Bells Are Ringing. Big deal. Judy Holly was going to be in it, the show, and everybody, Comden and Green, and you name it. So I go up for the open casting call. I get to meet a guy named Conrad Janis, who some of you might know. He's a great guy. What a nice guy with a trombone and all. He said, "Hey, good luck, kid." Whatever the case, everybody went out and they, "Oh, go ahead. Go ahead." And everybody sang, "The bells are ringing for me." And my guy, no, thanks, but goodbye. I got to think that so many people sang that I thought the lyric after "the bells are ringing" was next.
Yeah,
it didn't work. But the show, I saw that process, and it's so raw, and it's so so many guys go out and they think that, oh, this is my moment. And they sing in soprano, "So the bells are ringing for me." Wrong. It has nothing to do with the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And thank you. Take a subway home. You'll be all right.
I confuse that with, what's the name of the musical that's based on the movie The Apartment?
Yes. Promise is Promise.
Promise is Promise.
Promise is Promise.
Good show. I saw it in Boston in previews with Jerry Orbach. I love the show. It was a wonderful show. That's terrific. The show, I may have mentioned it before, where they needed an extra song, and Burt Bacharach caught pneumonia and was in Mass General Hospital. And so Hal David, his partner, went up and said, "Burt, you feel tough. You're sitting here pounding on your back, but we need an extra song. We need something right here." And Bacharach wrote, "What do you get when you fall in love? You get a lot of..." He wrote
that while lying in a bed?
Never fall in love again. That's where that song was. The day after I saw the show.
You get pneumonia. After you do, she'll never phone you.
Phone you, right. There it was. And the pneumonia came from he had pneumonia at the time. So the next day I'm walking through the National Endowment Bank in Park Square, Boston, and sitting at one of the executive desks is Jerry Orbach, who was in this show. He was great. I had never seen him before. And I said, "Jerry, how you doing?" It's good. And he's looking at me and he says, "Hey, you got any money? You got any money?" And then years later, I did Julian's radio talk show, and Jerry was one of the guests, as I recall.
He was a
nice guy.
He was a wonderful man.
What a talent!
Really, he could do it, and he's so good with in that Woody Allen movie, Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Yes,
as the hood who kills Angelica Houston, and he's Martin Landau's brother. Very, very.
So, Julian, I want to ask you, go back to one thing. On Bullets Over Broadway, when you did you do previews out of town or in New York?
No,
how did that work?
Woody wouldn't go out of town. I got Woody to go out of town on death-defying acts, and then he said to me, "I'm never going out of town again."
What was the town you went to?
I went to Stamford, Connecticut.
Close.
Not on Bullets. He wouldn't go on Bullets. I wanted to, but it fell on deaf ears, I'm afraid.
Right.
They're always reviving classics. Has there ever been a case where the classic didn't work? I mean, obviously they keep reviving it because it keeps working. But
the big success a couple of years ago was a revival of Merrily We Roll Along, which had flopped originally and then became a very big success.
Big success.
I think Sweeney Todd would be another example of a show that flopped and then came back as a big success.
Steve, talking about classics, there's a show on Broadway right now that is really shocking when you get down to it. Not that the cast isn't responsible, but they're doing over $3 million a week with Othello on Broadway because of Denzel Washington being in it, which goes to show you.
And Jake Gyllenhaal.
And Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
Star power. Othello, 2025, doing $3 million a week. I mean, that's astounding.
I was happy to bring back and refurbish Orson Welles' Othello, a wonderful version. And I'll tell you a quick story. We brought the movie back, and Beatrice Wells, his youngest daughter, was doing publicity for it. And she calls me one morning, very upset that the Las Vegas paper did a whole story on it. And I said, "Well, why are you so upset?" She said, "Because the very last line is, she's so excited about bringing back her father's movie, Othello."
Oh, God.
Othello.
Oh.
Come on,
Julian, we had a movie. We had a movie of Aida, and the poster came in, and our sales guy came up to me and said, "Hey, what's this movie, Aida?" The same thing.
I had a father-in-law years ago who said, "I understand." He's from the South. I said, "I understand your friend Barbara's got a new movie about a soup." I said, "About a soup?" He said, "Yentl." No, it's not lentil. It's Yentl.
So I'm writing game show questions for the Joker's Wild, Jack Barry, and we have a category on spy movies. And the question is, Dean Martin was in an episode of the Mad Helms series and featured a character named Lovey Kravitz. Who was the actress who played Lovey Kravitz? And I forgot to phonetically put it on the card that it's Lovey Craves It. Lovey Craves It. So obviously that was a bit of a challenge.
Did you keep your job?
I barely did. I learned a lot about game shows, though. It was an interesting. Never mind.
Stevie, not that it had anything to do with this subject, but Matt Helm. Were those good movies? I never saw one of them.
They were comic book movies. I mean, if you read the original Donald Hamilton novels that created the Matt Helm character, these are hard-edged Ian Fleming type spy novels that are really gritty. And basically Dean Martin turned them into, they're silly. And it's funny because the guy who produced them was originally Albert R. Broccoli's partner, Irving Allen. Irving Allen turned down the Bond movies, saying that he didn't even think they were good enough for television.
But the Matt Helm series was successful, wasn't it?
It was successful. They did 4 of them. And
how good were the In Like Flint series?
I don't think the Matt Helm movies were as good because I thought James Coburn as Derek Flint was terrific, particularly in the first one.
In Like Flint.
In Like Flint, yeah. Sure, definitely.
Well, guys, we certainly have taken a lot of bombs and tried to ignite them, but we can't bring them back. But on Merrily We Rolled Along, we said, and Sweeney Todd, there's 2 examples, so we can still sit around and see what's coming back that might make it.
One thing that comes out of this for sure is that with all the bombs that have come out of Broadway, when Broadway gets it right, boy, there's nothing quite like it. By the way,
my wife and daughter are going to New York City this week, and my daughter wants to see a musical called Six. Does anybody know anything about that?
SIX?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
It's quite a successful film.
It's
a play, rather.
It's very much.
And it's about Henry VIII and his wives.
The 6 wives of Henry VIII.
Did you see it, Mike?
I saw it when it was at the Fox Theater here in Atlanta. It was amazing.
Oh good.
Your daughter and your wife are going to love it.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, very good. I will pass that on.
So,
Mike,
yes.
how long has it been since the Fox was refurbished?
Oh, probably at least 30 years ago.
Yeah. How great is that theater?
It's an amazing theater. The sound isn't the best, but it is an amazing theater to see musicals and plays and even concerts. We have season tickets for Broadway in Atlanta, and it's just amazing to see.
But how many seats in the Fox? 3,000 plus?
Yeah. It's a big location. And it's wonderful to be able to see, because every seat is good in that theater. There's not a bad seat in that theater.
Yeah, the same as the Fox in St. Louis, where I happily saw Johnny Mathis sing some great songs. He just
Chances
retired.
are.
Mm-hmm.
He just retired, Johnny Mathis.
Really?
Read that? Yeah.
Yep.
Anyhow, I thank you for helping me out on Broadway today.
You were great. This was a good show. It's fun. I mean, there's only one. Broadway is a very unique, wonderful experience for people who go there. And I know people who go there all the time. They see all the shows, plays, shows. It's like an addiction.
We need to turn over the microphone to our producer and host, and narrator and guiding light, Mr. Mike Faber.
Well, thank you, Steve. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you, and we wouldn't want to be a Broadway bomb at all. So we want to hear from you guys at home. Please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you can also find us wherever fine podcasts are found. So now you can find us up on our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into any kind of social media, please check us up on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening on their shows this week on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
This week is Susie Essman from Curb Your Enthusiasm, an old stand-up friend of mine. I've known her for many years, and she's done fantastic working with Larry David and Jeff Garland, and we talk a lot about how Curb Your Enthusiasm's put together. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Steve, what's happening over on Saturday night at the movies?
So we are going to be talking to a gentleman from Paris. He's an American. His name is Bruce Handy. He's written a book called Hollywood High, a totally epic, way opinionated history of teen movies.
Oh, cool.
So it's going to be all about the Brat Pack and Rebel Without a Cause and the Porky's Kids, and it'll be really a lot of fun since I worked on some of those.
I'm sure.
All I ask, Steve, is to find out about Mamie Van Doren in High School Confidential.
The world's oldest teenager.
That is awesome. All right, Arthur, what's cooking on our show next week?
Well, first with Susie Essman, who has brought cursing to an art.
Yeah.
Fine art. She does them all.
FF.
We're going to be talking next week about a movie that changed the whole motion picture industry called Jaws. We're going to take it from soup to nuts on how that happened, why it happened, all the mistakes that took place that worked in the advantage of it. An epic subject, and we'll be doing Jaws next week.
That is awesome. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you for folks for listening to our Broadway talk tonight. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber, and we'll see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Hello and welcome to your special delivery of the Cosmic Pizza podcast. I am Casey from the UK.
Down in the UK.
Finger on the pulse. That's this show. That's definitely what we're all about.
All in the UK. I don't eat mashed potato. It's horrible stuff.
John in Canada. First world problems. It's the only kind I have.
How are you doing, Paul?
And all 7 of our listeners want to know.
I'm pretty sure most of them are here. And we are here to serve you a delicious slice of life.
The Cosmic Pizza podcast is not about the cosmos, all about pizza.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.